Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bible study. We are in Nehemiah chapter 7 today. We've got 73 verses, so we better get going, but they may look pretty familiar to you if you were with us for our Ezra chapter 2 study. I do want to cover the majority of our timeline today because it will be relevant to some of the things that we're talking about. So around 538 BC, this is almost 100 years before Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem. Cyrus the Great conquered the nation of Babylon, who had taken the Israelites captive, or the people of Judah captive, and Cyrus decreed that the people of Judah were allowed to leave Babylonia and return to their home in Judah, the Promised Land. So, we talked about them doing that. We talked about them rebuilding the temple, and that temple was finally completed about 516 BC. We talked about Ezra, the priest who came to teach the law of God to the people. He arrived in Jerusalem about 457 BC in a later wave of returning exiles. And then we talked about Nehemiah, who comes to Jerusalem about 444 BC from Susa, the capital of Persia. In terms of our main characters today, we have Nehemiah. He's the former Jewish cupbearer to the king of Persia, and he came to Jerusalem and helped rebuild the walls of the city. He was appointed the governor of Judah. We're also going to talk about a guy named Hanani, which we haven't highlighted before. Nehemiah appointed him to oversee Jerusalem after the walls had been constructed, so he's delegating some authority here. And then we're going to talk about Jewish captives. And this is why I went over the whole timeline, because we're kind of going to step back in time a little bit to talk about some people from the past. These Jewish captives, the nation of Judah, as I mentioned, was taken captive by the Babylonians, and they were in captivity in Babylonia for 70 years. They lived there until Cyrus, king of Persia, conquered Babylon and let them go. More on that in our outline. Our key locations for today that are going to be highlighted on our map, of course, we have Jerusalem. This city has been being rebuilt for the last several decades after the people of Judah have been allowed to return home. We have Babylon, which was the capital of the Babylonian Empire, conquered by Cyrus. And just to kind of fill you in on some details as to how far Babylonia was from Judah, we looked at this in our previous studies. It's about a 900-mile journey from Babylonia to Judah. The people who made that journey would have followed the rivers like the Euphrates River to the northwest and then dropped down along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea to come to Judah. So it was quite an extensive journey. It was not something that was just undertaken by anybody. So for our outline, we've got two sections. The second one is way bigger than the first. The first one is verses 1 through 4, Nehemiah's orders concerning the gates of Jerusalem. So when Nehemiah and the Jews had finally finished the walls and the gates of the city, as I mentioned, he puts this man named Hananiah in charge of Jerusalem and gives him authority to watch over the city, and he gives him some instructions. Nehemiah instructed Hananiah to open the gates of Jerusalem late in the morning and to close them early. And considering the threats that they had received recently from people like Sanballat and Tobiah, even threats of violence, the city still needed to be protected, even though the gates and the walls were finished. So the gates needed to be very carefully managed. Men from the city were appointed to be guards, and we're also told this interesting fact, which will come into play a little bit later. The text informs us that Jerusalem was really large. There's a lot of area here, but there weren't a lot of people that lived within the city. They had also not yet built permanent homes for themselves within the city. This is kind of interesting because the rebuilding of Jerusalem has been going on for nearly 100 years at this point, but it really, really has been a slow process, and doesn't seem like too many people are super excited to come live in this new reconstruction. Well, my camera is flashing red at me because I may have forgotten to charge the battery. So if it dies, it dies. It won't be a big issue. We'll just lose the video, but we'll still have the audio, which is the important part. Section number 2, this is the big one, verses 5 through 73, a record of the Jews who returned from Babylon. God prompted Nehemiah to register all of the people and to make a genealogy. No doubt this was for, future reference to know where people had come from, what their tribal background was. Now, in the process of this, he found a book that contained all of the names of those who were the first to return to Judah following the end of the Babylonian captivity. And that's why I rehashed a lot of that history that maybe you thought we left behind at this point. It's because we're going to be talking about those people who were the first ones to come back to Judah after Cyrus gave his decree in about 538 BC. And the rest of Nehemiah 7, and all these verses that we have in this chapter is a record of the registry that Nehemiah discovered in that book, and it's very similar to the registry in Ezra chapter 2. So if you're with us for Ezra 2, this will pretty much be a review. But if not, just keep in mind, because it can be a little bit confusing, that the group here that we're talking about returning to Jerusalem, this is a group that arrived in Jerusalem about 90 to 100 years before Ezra got there. So he's not talking about a contemporary group that came to the city. These are his ancestors at this point. So let's just go ahead and go through all of these details and all of these numbers. There were 42,360 Israelites or Jews who made the initial journey. The families that descended from the tribes of Levi, specifically the priestly families, are highlighted in the genealogy. They were important because the priests would be instrumental in the construction and the daily administration of the new temple. The priestly families served in the holy things at the temple, but several other groups assisted them in their work. The text gives attention to the other families of Levi, the temple gatekeepers, and the temple servants. There were a few hundred people who claimed to be from the tribe of Israel who returned with them, but they weren't able to prove which tribe they were from. And some even claimed to be from the priestly family. So they said, we're authorized to be priests. But there was no record of their family lineage. And so the decision was made to exclude them from the priestly duties until their lineage could be proved. The test of their claims was the Urim and Thummim. The Urim and Thummim were tools that the priests used to discern the will of God. You can read more about them in the passages that are listed there on the outline. We're also told that in addition to the humans who made the journey, there was a number of animals, 700 and some horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys, probably to carry everybody's stuff. And when they arrived in Jerusalem, many of the men contributed to the rebuilding temple, and the quantities of their gifts is recorded in verses 70 through 73. So that's our quick summary of, and it is definitely quick, of Nehemiah chapter 7. I know I can't really do 73 verses justice in 5 minutes, but I also know that for many of you who are with us for Ezra, that's review at this point. So let's go ahead and talk about our application before we finish up. What kind of application can we get from a big list of names and numbers? Well, we can get an application from the context in which all of this happened. When Cyrus, king of Persia, gave the Jews permission to return to Judah, the promised land, it's estimated that the initial returnees only amounted to somewhere between 2 to 6% of the total Jewish population, so most people didn't go back. And this is kind of a shocking number considering a lot of God's promises centered around this land. This is the land in which God was going to bless his people, yet they didn't really want to go back to it. After spending 70 years in Babylon, a lot of them had found a new home there. They weren't particularly interested in going back to the ruin that was Jerusalem. While Jerusalem certainly wasn't the nicest place in the world to live, it was their home, and its temple was supposed to be a key part of their religious life. The 2 to 6% of individuals who went back had to endure a lot of hardships upon their initial return, and I think they deserve credit for going back in that initial wave, and God does give them credit by listing them twice in the biblical record. They sacrificed what was probably an easier life to embrace a more difficult life, but a life that was closer to their God. And I think there's an application here for us in the modern day as followers of Jesus. Not everybody who wears the name of Jesus is serious enough to sacrifice for him, to grow closer to him. Amongst those who call themselves Christians, few are willing to abandon their comforts for a life that draws them closer to God. And so for application today, I want you to ask yourself this question and be honest with yourself. Would I be among the 2 to 6% that returned? Would I make a sacrifice like that if that's what it took to get closer to God? Would I upend my life? Would I change my life? The habits that I like, the parts of my lifestyle that I like. If I had to give all those things up to be closer to God, would I do it? Am I really committed, or would I be part of the 95% that wasn't willing to leave Babylon behind? So that's going to do it for our study in Nehemiah chapter 7. I suspect this one might have gone a little bit long, but what can you do? I hope you'll join me tomorrow for Nehemiah chapter 8.